The trickster god Loki has many illegitimate children, each one more malevolent than the last, some even hiding in the darkest corners of Earth. Many who venture into these places never return, for good friends agreed to hike the King's Trail at the border between Sweden and Norway. This area is far from civilization, with no signal at all. As they gazed at the majestic Rift Valley, they were reminded of the legend that these mountains were carved out by the Norse giants with their hammers. Not long after they arrived, it began to rain, as if the heavens were urging them to turn back. Walking on the slippery slope, Dom twisted his ankle due to a moment's carelessness. Their original plan was to take 6 hours to bypass the forest ahead and reach a temporary camp, rest there, and then spend another 8 hours to return to their reserved hotel. However, Dom cried out that his twisted ankle wouldn't allow him to walk for 14 hours. Hutch took out the map to replan the route. If they cut straight through the forest in front of them, they could reach the hotel in half the time. They had a lot of hiking experience but had never hiked through a forest before. After hesitating for a moment, they decided to go with Hutch's suggestion. Little did they know that the forest was hiding the trickster god's illegitimate children. The moment they stepped into the forest, their compass broke. Hutch didn't tell the others but decided to keep going, hoping for the best. Hutch thought the distance wasn't far, and as long as they kept walking, they would get out of the forest. While they were imagining what delicious meal they would have back at the hotel, Luke, who was walking ahead, was suddenly startled by something in the distance. It was a moose, gutted and hung on a tree. They guessed it might have been the work of hunters in the forest, who hung it up as bait. Luke saw that the moose was still bleeding, meaning it had just died not long ago. Fearing the killer might still be nearby, he urged the others to leave quickly. Without a compass, they lost their way in the forest. By nightfall, they still hadn't found their way out. As they prepared to camp for the night, they spotted an abandoned cabin in the distance. Though the cabin was dilapidated, it at least offered shelter from the rain. Inside, there were some old pieces of furniture and a hunting rifle. On the second floor of the cabin, there was something even more eerie. This was a scarecrow with deer antlers for arms, and its legs were made from dried human hands. They went back downstairs, started a fire, and began discussing the purpose of the scarecrow. They speculated that it was part of a sacrificial ritual for the Norse gods. After comforting each other, they fell into a deep sleep. But just as they lay down, the outside suddenly lit up. Luke stepped outside and found himself in a supermarket. He picked up a bottle of vodka from the shelf and suddenly woke up. It was already daytime, and Luke found 5 new wounds on his chest. Before he could think further, he heard Hutch screaming. Luke woke Hutch, only to find that Hutch had wet his pants out of fear. Hutch must have had a nightmare that no adult could endure. Dom, with his injured leg, was also trapped in a nightmare, shouting his wife's name loudly. Meanwhile, Phil was kneeling in front of the scarecrow upstairs, motionless. He only woke up when Luke called out to him. Phil was also startled upon waking. He didn't know why he was there. Everything that had happened was too bizarre, completely beyond scientific explanation. After gathering their thoughts, they decided to pack up and leave as if nothing had happened. However, from their trembling hands, it was clear that this incident would haunt their minds forever. They continued along a naturally formed path, encountering many artificially crafted routes used for lighting along the way. Dom, with his injured leg, stopped to rest after walking a short distance. Luke took the opportunity to scout the nearby hillside. When he reached the top, he saw only more forest, and his hope turned to despair. Soon after, Luke smelled something strange. Looking around, he saw something hiding behind the trees. Luke quickly returned to the resting spot and told the others that there was something in the forest and they needed to leave immediately. To convince Dom, Luke showed the mysterious wounds on his chest, leaving the others speechless. They all wanted to leave the forest as soon as possible, but without a compass, they were like headless chickens. Until it got dark again, they still hadn't found a way out. They set up their tent in the woods, planning to eat some dry food they had brought along to satisfy their hunger. Just then, Luke heard a noise outside the tent, followed by Phil's scream. Luke stepped out of the tent and saw Phil kneeling on the ground, pointing ahead. Following Phil's direction, Luke saw that Hutch's tent was destroyed, and Phil said he saw a shadow drag Hutch away. In the distance, they heard Hutch's screams and a roar. The 3 of them followed the sound, but even as dawn broke, they hadn't found Hutch. Even more frightening was that the forest seemed like a maze, and they couldn't find their way back to the campsite. Having lost their luggage and tent, the three of them rested against a tree for a moment until it was fully daylight before continuing on. They hadn't gone far when they saw Hutch's lifeless body. Seeing Hutch's condition, Luke almost threw up. Hutch was gutted and hung on a tree, just like the moose they saw earlier. The three of them couldn't possibly carry Hutch's body, so they laid him down and covered him with branches before continuing on. After walking for a long time, they finally found a small stream. They didn't care about the dirty water and drank deeply. Luke looked up and was surprised to see human footprints not far away. The three of them unanimously agreed that Hutch had been killed by hunters in the forest, so they decided not to follow the path with footprints. They climbed up the hillside and continued southwest, but none of them noticed the monster lurking not far behind them. Luke was the first to climb up the hill. From the top, he could see the edge of the forest. Excitedly, he told Dom and Phil, who were resting halfway up the slope, about his discovery. Miraculously, the compass had started working again, but then Luke saw torches lighting up in the forest across from them. Where there were torches, there was hope. Just as Luke returned to the hillside to tell the others, he witnessed a horrifying scene.
What are you doing? Dom?
This time, Luke finally saw clearly that Phil was being dragged away by a monster. Now it was just Luke and Dom. Dom, his voice trembling, said that the monster was hunting them. Luke promised Dom that no matter what, he wouldn't leave him behind. Luke takes Dom and runs away as fast as he can. They came upon a narrow path, illuminated on both sides by burning tree roots, and saw Phil's lifeless body hanging from a tree. They walked along the path, which led to another cabin. As soon as they entered the room and caught their breath, they saw an old woman inside. Immediately after, they were knocked unconscious. When they woke up, it was daylight. An old woman brought water to Luke, and shortly after, two men came in and took Dom away. Moments later, Dom's screams echoed through the air. A young woman appeared and told Luke that they were preparing for a sacrifice. After what seemed like an eternity, Dom's screams ceased, and he was brought back to Luke, covered in wounds from the torture. Dom, knowing he was to be sacrificed, told Luke he must escape and burn everything down. Dom was taken outside and tied to a stake. He looked up and saw that the surrounding trees were filled with human bones hanging from their branches. He remained tied up until nightfall. During this time, Luke was constantly trying to escape. He used all his strength to break free from the ropes binding him, rubbing his wrists raw in the process, but he was still just a bit short of getting loose. Finally, Luke made the grim decision to break his own thumb to free himself from the rope. Meanwhile, something was approaching Dom in the forest.
KO!
To his shock, it appeared to be his wife, Gail, who walked up to him and caressed his cheek. Moments later, Dom snapped out of the illusion to find it wasn't his wife but the monster. The creature took Dom and hung him from a tree. After Dom's death, the woman comes back to Luke and Luke asks the woman what the monster was.
A god? Ancient? One of the Jotun? A bastard offspring of Loki.
Because you're afraid of it.
We worship it. It keeps us here. Let us live beyond natural life. Your ritual begins tonight. You will kneel before the god. If not, it will hang you from the trees.
After the woman left, Luke freed himself completely from the ropes. He searched the room for useful items and found a storeroom full of hunting rifles. Luke thought about escaping but saw many people guarding the door, so he quietly hid upstairs. From a room upstairs, he heard chanting. Luke listened for a while, then picked up a nearby torch and prepared to investigate. When Luke opened the door, the chanting stopped abruptly. Inside, he saw rows of dried-up bones. Luke carefully moved further into the room and discovered that these bones were still alive. It turned out these were all followers of the monster. They had indeed achieved eternal life, but they continued to age until they became their current fragile, skeletal forms. Unable to die even in this decrepit state, without hesitation, Luke used the torch to set the bones on fire, releasing these wretched souls from their torment. Seeing his own believers were burned to death, Motor also came this way. The others saw this situation have fallen to their knees on the ground. Luke returned to the storeroom, grabbed a hunting rifle, and prepared to defend himself. As he was about to escape, Motor appeared at the door. Luke crashed through the burned wooden wall and fled. He ran frantically toward the forest's edge, but curiosity made him look back. He saw Motor lifting the woman high in the air. In shock, Luke aimed his gun and shot at Motor. Luke runs wildly in front of him, with Motor in hot pursuit. Motor let out a roar, and Luke fell into a hallucination. A row of supermarket shelves appeared out of nowhere in the woods, and it was Motor who revealed Luke's deepest pain. Before deciding to hike the King's Trail, something tragic had happened to Luke. He and his friend Robert had gone to a supermarket to buy alcohol and encountered a couple of thugs assaulting the store owner and robbing the place. Seeing the knife-wielding thugs, Luke backed away in fear and hid. Robert, however, bravely tried to stop the thugs, but these thugs were ruthless. They struck Robert's head with their weapons, splitting it in half on the spot. Luke hid the entire time, not intervening or making a sound, watching helplessly as his friend Robert died. Since then, this incident had become a deep wound in Luke's heart. Luke had often imagined that if he had stepped in, maybe Robert wouldn't have died. In the hallucination created by Motor, Luke continued running toward the forest's edge. However, on two legs, he couldn't possibly outrun the four-legged Motor. Motor struck Luke, sending him rolling across the ground. His axe fell from his hand, and the edge of the forest was just ahead. Luke struggled to his feet and continued moving forward. Motor pinned Luke to the ground, forcing him to kneel, beginning the ritual for eternal life. Luke stood up again, only to be knocked down by Motor. This time, Luke saw the axe within reach. He grabbed it and stood to face Motor directly. After Luke stepped out of the forest, Motor did not follow. It seemed trapped within the forest, expressing its rage through loud roars. Seeing that Motor couldn't approach, Luke mustered his courage and roared back in defiance.